W
N
N
H
8
H
8
L
L P
1
1
O
O G
point
point
5
5
F
F
M
M
New Haven
New Haven
streaming
Streaming
live
live
at
at
www
www.
dot New Haven Independent
Knows yay.
Hello and welcome to WNHH Radio's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make the Elm City tick. Justin Elicker makes New Haven tick. He's looking to step up that game by seeking to become our next mayor. He's in the WNHH studio to tell us all about that. Justin Elicker, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
We didn't ask you to bring your guitar this time. But
No.
maybe when we do the Great Give again, you can make up another story. There's still someone in city government who sings the song that you improvised during the Great Give about when I chopped my finger cutting kale.
I'm not sure as I even remember the tune. We'll have to dig it up.
Actually, it was a CFG song, I believe, or a GCD song.
That's
4 or 5.
most. I'm kind of a one-trick pony with the
Yeah.
with the guitar.
He said, I cut my finger on the kale. But then at one point, you actually said, I cut my finger upon the kale, which I thought was very funny because that's going into the vernacular of the roots of the Appalachian sort of folk music.
I appreciate that, Paul, but I think it may have been unintentional.
Oh, you want another syllable?
But,
That's how Bob Dylan wrote some of his best lyrics.
Maybe the poetry of it was not intentional. It was just making sure that the rhythm was there.
That's what I mean, but that's some of the best poetry.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
I would argue that is how Bob Dylan wrote some of his best songs.
Thank you.
Or like Paul Simon.
Did you just compare me to Bob Dylan?
No.
Okay.
But Bob, I'm just saying the process. But like Paul Simon, when he wrote the third verse to Bridge Over Troubled Water, Sail on Silver Girl, those words sound so good.
Right.
He said they mean absolutely nothing. We only had 2 verses. They said in the studio we needed a third verse. And he had the syllables fit, but those are good lyrics.
Well, it's not indicative of my much more deep process in thinking about politics and
That's right.
policy
We're
in
actually
New
going to be
Haven.
rational today. We're not going to talk about the rhythm of the words,
Right.
but how you'd like to run the city if you become our next mayor.
Mhm.
So Justin Elker, you're running. Last night you were in City Hall
It was.
for the annual State of the City address. You were not giving it. You were watching the current mayor, Tony Harp,
Mhm.
whom you're looking to unseat, give the speech. If you had been given the speech last night, would it have sounded the same? I mean, most of what the speech was, and the speech surprised me. It wasn't a campaign speech. It was shout outs to all the people in city government. What would you have said?
First of all, I think that it's important for us to commend the mayor for highlighting the hard work of many city employees. I often think that city employees are the target of a lot of the criticism that goes on, whether it's on social media, see Click Fix, or at public meetings, or on your
Comment
section. And the overwhelming majority of city employees, many of whom I've interacted with over the years, are doing incredible work, oftentimes not paid as well as they could be if they worked in the private sector, and are really good people.
And even when they make mistakes, that's like a bad day of someone who primarily wants to do public service.
Right.
And I mean, that's since 1980s. There's been a move to define government as them rather than us, and to blame all problems on people in government to trying to get us. That was with Ronald Reagan's election. And the whole conversation's gone that way leading up to the Trump election. It's not just in New Haven.
Right.
Everybody's always dumping on people in government. Not that we don't want to hold them accountable. Not that we don't want to do better. Not that you don't want to catch bad apples doing something wrong.
And at the national level, it's been, I think, particularly offensive in recent years, with the government shutdown and some of the things that Trump has said about federal employees is pretty bad.
Deep state.
So I just to get back to the state of the city, I think it's important to be positive about the work that city employees are doing. There were a number of things that surprised me about the state of the city. Mayor Harp highlighted a number of things that as accomplishments that I actually think are more challenges for the city, and I would have framed it that way. The drug overdoses on the green is a major challenge, and the city's response to that was a response as opposed to being proactive. She mentioned the reduction in number of children that are reported for high levels of lead content in their blood as an accomplishment of the city, when I think it's a public health crisis. And the numbers she shared were confusing and indicated that.
Well, and people can get the details. There's a very good story in the New Haven Register today in which Mary O'Leary interviews Justin about critiques of that speech. One of the critiques was interesting, and what happens when you might do that if you're elected too. You'll highlight the better spin on numbers. John DeStefano, who's mayor, when he ran for governor in one year, talked about the great school numbers in graduation. And then the year after, when he decided he needed to have school reform, he used the same numbers and said they showed a crisis in graduation. So this isn't new.
Yeah.
So Tony Harp, when she talks about lead paint, usually gives us credit for having a more demanding standard of what constitutes lead paint poisoning, using a federal rather than a state standard. But last night she used the state standard to make it look like things are under control, rather than the health department has been, criticized by 2 judges for completely failing to keep track of lead paint cases or follow up or even put them into a computer.
But just to be clear, and I don't know if you want to go down the road on the specifics with lead paint, but she did not use the state standard.
That's what I'm saying.
So the state standard is 20 micrograms per deciliter. The state
that's the level of poisoning
which is much higher. The city's standard, which they passed in the 70s or whenever, there was a lot of research coming out about the detrimental effects of lead in gasoline and paint. The city standard is the state standard or the CDC standard, whichever one's lower. And the CDC standard now is 5.
Centers for Disease Control.
Yes, exactly. And so this number 10, I don't know where it came from. And then what was odd to me is that even when she was interviewed in Mary's article, she was saying that 10 is a state standard, which is inaccurate.
I mean, the big picture is there's been this lead paint crisis that 2 separate judges have reamed out the city, and
3
testimony that 3?
Yeah,
I didn't see the 3rd.
According to legal aid, it's 3.
Okay, and then also I was there in court one day when they admitted they don't enter cases into a computer. They are hand.
Yeah. And I think, and we can maybe talk about that in a bit, but I think that's indicative of some of the challenges and ways that we can improve what's going on in City Hall in cost-effective and more productive strategies for addressing lead or the issues on the green or many other challenges.
Now, the Hart administration, she doesn't always do a good job of, when she does do something well, of calling attention to it. Mm-hmm. She has specifics of since the green incident, where she's gone to Washington, gone to Hartford, had very specific ideas about how to be proactive, have a drying out center near the green, getting a state street psychiatrist. There are a bunch of efforts she's trying to do, bringing the groups together that hadn't been done before. Mm-hmm. You didn't really hear the specifics of that in the state. There was an issue there in the speech last night. There's a reference to it. What are you saying you would do different about how you would tackle strategically and getting in front of things like the drug abuse and the lead paint?
So my wife and I walk across the green probably every day, getting lunch, shopping, because we both live close to downtown. And 10 years ago, I could have told you that this was going to be a problem. And anyone that experiences the green in New Haven recognizes that there are people that are facing incredible personal challenges. There's the opioid addiction nationwide, and we're seeing a lot of drug and mental health challenges at the local level on our green.
And of course, we wouldn't be talking about this, and the world would not have been watching New Haven for a news cycle if it weren't for a bad patch of K2 that had nothing to do with opioids that were sold in the green.
Exactly. So I would say that one of my themes about what we really need to do about government is be much more proactive instead of reactive. And mm-hmm. I'm sure that the majority of your listeners could have told you years and years ago that this was a problem that needed to be addressed, and we just haven't been addressing it.
Okay, so now what would you do?
So there's a number of things that I think we need to do. I think it's important for us to move the APT. It provides some good services, but to move the center, make it more accessible and safe for people that are participating in the services. Some people go in, get their treatment and go out and they're fine. But a lot of people are waiting outside, and that's the place where there's been a lot of indication that drug dealers are actually targeting those
we have the
locations
photo.
because
Yeah,
they have
we
a
watched it happen.
vulnerable population. So working with APT to move the create a safer waiting space for people.
Now, the one idea to deal with that Mayor Harp had was that she thought we should give permission for more psychiatrists and psychologists to be able to prescribe the medication from their office, so you don't have the situation where lots of people are waiting for their meds every morning outside APT.
I'd like to think about that a little bit more because, I mean, the concern is that it's oftentimes too easy to get these drugs, and you want to make sure that there's enough support and social service support and wraparound services that we're not just putting a Band-Aid on a problem.
And that you also don't have an OxyContin situation where then you have the drug manufacturers give the incentives to prescribe.
Exactly. But so on top of that, I think one of the major challenges is the bus stop there. And again, this issue has come up year after year after year. The Green should have bus stops. There's so many people that are coming to the Green, but the Green should not be our major transportation hub. We should have an indoor, safe bus station where people that are transferring from bus line to bus line should be able to feel comfortable in a supervised environment that is climatized and not have to stand outside. And it's very hard to tell a drug dealer from a person waiting for the bus because they're all just waiting, right? And so the current.
By the way, when I'm waiting, I'm waiting for the bus. I promise.
so am I. So am I.
So you say,
and that's something that I talked about in 2013, as we need an indoor bus station.
So she has the mayor said we're trying to get the state to do that where they're building the new garage. So do you agree with her about that?
You're talking about it in Union Station. I think that's a good site for it.
So you agree with her about that?
Yeah, because we should be doing more transit-oriented development, and I think that's a good site.
And if the state and Lamont is open to reconsidering that, at least according to Susan Beiswitz, his lieutenant governor. So you're in agreement with Mayor Harp about this?
Yes. The only thing I would say is I would have been much more proactive about it because we've known about this problem for many, many years.
Okay, and we are not taking calls today except from Bob, because he always gets the call on Mayor Monday. Bob is our favorite question asker, so we're going to let him come on the air.
Okay.
Bob, you're on with Justin Elicker.
Hey, Paul. Hey, Justin. How are you?
Good. Sorry we didn't hear from you yesterday. The mayor had to take a week off from Mayor Monday. So it's would be Mayor Tuesday.
And now I get to speak to a man who's going to run against her.
Yeah, is running.
Is running.
So what do you got, Bob? What's the question for
Justin?
Justin?
Signatures. And how many signatures do you need to get if you don't get the nomination, Justin?
We'll cross that bridge down the road, but I'm planning on getting the nomination this time around.
That's always a good thing. I guess my first question to you is, what are you going to do to, I want to say, change the city, if at all?
Okay. Thank you for the question, Bob. So a lot of people have been asking me, why am I running for mayor? And I actually, to be totally honest, ask myself that question oftentimes as well. And I'll give you an example of last night after the state of the city. I, talked with a number of reporters and talked with other people that were at the event, and then hopped on my bicycle, put on my helmet and my lights to make sure I could get safely home, and raced as fast as I could to make sure that I was hoping my daughter would still be awake before I got home, so I could say goodnight to her. We have a nighttime routine where I talk to her animals and she gives me a hug. And the challenge, I think, is that I worry that I might not be the best dad if I'm doing this, because I'm losing time with my family, and I need to make sure that I'm giving them the kind of support that they need. And so I struggle with that, but at the same time, I walk throughout the city and I see these things that are going on in the city, and I'm sure a lot of people feel the same way. It's just this feeling of frustration, and that we talk about the challenges of people that are really struggling with a lot of issues that are on the green. The fact that Yale University students have a all-you-can-eat buffet that says gourmet food, but then 2 blocks away, you have families that can't put food on the table for their children. My good friends in Cedar Hill almost lost their house because they missed a payment on their mortgage. And I look at those things and I feel like I can't stand by and see these challenges without stepping up and being part of the solution. And that's the kind of role model that I want to be for my girls as well. And so that's why I'm running for mayor, is because I see the potential in fixing a lot of these challenges. And so you asked, what am I going to do as mayor? And the short answer, I just gave you quite a long answer of why I'm motivated to run, but the short answer is I'm going to focus on jobs, public education, and taxes. And the way to do that, and I can go into a lot of details on each one of those bullet points, but I think that the foundation of the spirit of what I will resolve and the kind of government I lead is one that is more responsive, is open, is transparent. Paul mentioned that a lot of mayors often manipulate the numbers, and I didn't have a moment to interject.
I wasn't saying
there.
the incumbent does more than any other I've ever seen. I think there are different ways of looking at numbers to make them seem positive or negative.
I didn't have a moment to interject, but I'm not going to do that. And you can believe me now, or when I'm elected, I'll show you that I'm not going to do that. I think that we owe the residents of this city the respect, an acknowledgement that they are mature adults that are able to understand numbers and are able to digest the fact that we have challenges that we're working on. And the problem with politics is oftentimes that politicians manipulate the numbers too much and try to trick people into thinking that things are good when they're not entirely good, and are not open and honest about it. And then that's part of what's contributed to this real mistrust between people and politicians, and why politician is a bad word today.
All right. Bob, did you have it? And thank you for the question, Bob. Bob always pulls us back to the obvious question that we start to talk about, and I forget to ask.
That's why we're here, yeah.
Justin, the police department will be a challenge if you become mayor. Do you plan on having a nationwide search for chief, or do you think there's somebody capable of leading the department?
Okay, and Bob, thank you so much for your questions as always, man. Hope you call next Monday with Mayor Monday.
Not a problem. I'll listen in, Paul.
Oh, yeah, why don't you listen on your radio? Thanks. So, Justin, I don't know if you're going to get to pick a police chief. We don't know if there'll be an interim, or I'm guessing there'll be a pick before you're in. But in general, would you hold a nationwide search for police chief?
I think there's some people that are local that have potential.
In the department, or retired?
I don't want to. Part of this is also who wants the job, and so I don't want to commit to nationwide or local before I know what the landscape is.
But there's a fundamental question facing the police department.
Mm-hmm.
Tony Harp has honestly waited on this question. The question, partly, it's a tough one, because even though there's always personality about Chief Campbell resigning and who said what, the truth is, I believe there's no ill will on any side. I think that police officers from the top down are upset because if you work in the suburbs, you get at least $20,000 more often to do a job that's less dangerous, and you get better benefits.
Mm-hmm.
And city alders and budget officials are frustrated because we have a structural fiscal deficit. We can't afford to keep paying the benefits we paid in order to compete to keep cops. And so if we pay them what the suburbs pay, we can't afford it. So then the fundamental question becomes, can we have fewer cops? Because and you're going to know this if you're a mayor, as soon as there are some crimes that are upsetting, even if the trend is that there's a lot less crime, people demand an immediate reaction and say there's a new problem. And so we have a lot more cops than other departments. And that was the basis of the old version of community policing, walking beats. So Tony Harp says we can't go back on that because the one solution being proposed is you have fewer cops but pay them better. You keep them longer. And one guy, John Elicker, used to be chief, says, well, he never bought into the old version of community policing. He says that a guy who's going to be a good walking cop, or a woman is going to be a good walking cop even if they're in patrol cars, they'll get out and walk. And if you're a walking cop who's not going to be a walking cop, you're going to hide out from people. And that with fewer cops, you can cover more ground by having the combination of car and walking, get rid of some special units we created. You don't need 4 assistant chiefs, and that you can have a leaner department that he thinks can keep us just as safe. Tony Harp, who wrote the community policing program in the late 80s and early 90s as an alder, says that walking beats, which are more labor intensive, are the reason we have lower crime than other cities, and we can't go back on that. Where do you weigh in on that question?
Yeah. So you touched on a number of points, and I was
fewer cops who are paid more.
I was talking with a lieutenant and a retired police officer the other day about this issue, and morale in the police department is lower than it's been for a long time. You know, as you know, they're in binding arbitration with their contract and everything else, and I think that it's very important to underscore, first of all, just how good many of our police officers are, and they are sacrificing a great deal to work in the city. And I think oftentimes the police are targeted, sometimes fairly, sometimes not. But I think it's important for the leadership in the police department to acknowledge the incredible work that they are doing. I'm particularly concerned about the fact that Yale University is stealing our officers. I mean,
a lot of people are applying there. There aren't that many openings.
Yeah, but they're paying more people. They're providing more benefits to steal officers from the very municipality where they live. It's almost like your big brother stealing your lunch money for candy or something like that. It's ridiculous. And I think that we need to have a pretty strong conversation with Yale about the appropriateness of that.
You're not going to let officers apply to Yale?
No, I would say that it has to come from the other way, that we need to have an agreement with Yale about this.
Saying what?
Saying that Yale is not allowed to, either we have more equitable pay across the boundaries, or Yale is not allowed to take our officers.
But there's a restraint of trade there. You can't stop a person from applying a job from another entity.
Right, but Yale can stop offering the amount that they're offering.
You want them to pay their cops less?
Yeah, or we can pay ours more. But I think it's ridiculous for us to not have an agreement with Yale because they're stealing our officers. And this question of larger police force, I mean, we don't effectively have community policing in many ways right now. Our district managers. Do you think
most people know who their cop is?
No. A lot of
I don't know anyone who knows who their beat cop is.
A lot of active community members know who their district manager is. Mm-hmm. And frustration around the city is that district managers move and move and move, or are transferred to different departments.
And to be fair, without disagreeing with you at all, to be fair, there's a shortage of people in supervisory capacity. There's an idea they wanted lieutenants to be district managers. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they've gone to sergeants.
Right.
But that's a problem also with beat cops. Everybody walks the beat at the beginning, but there aren't incentives, and this is my bugaboo. There aren't incentives the way to keep a teacher in a classroom who wants to be in a classroom. There aren't incentives to be a beat cop for 20 years, although some do it, who walk and really get to know a neighborhood.
Right.
But anyway, your point, Justin, is we're moving around the DMs too much, the district managers too much.
Moving around, yes, moving around the district managers too much. And I think there's other tools that we can use to encourage our cops to stay. I mean, one of the things that New Haven can offer that, I don't know, Cheshire or Oxford can't offer is the ability to move up. There's a lot of small police departments where if an officer is interested and comfortable in being a police officer for many, many years and not moving up, and also not experiencing the diversity of challenges that we experience here, and in some cases the excitement, there's obviously a risk, but excitement that brings, that's in some ways something that I think attracts some officers to New Haven, is this ability, this upward mobility option.
That's the point Campbell made, Chief Campbell, a few months ago. He said, what we got to do is not pretend that we can't compete in some ways, but we compete in others. You get more interesting work. You get to develop expertise in certain kinds of investigative projects that happen here.
You know, there's other things we can offer.
But what about the fundamental question? Would you lower the number of cops and have fewer walking beats? Would you lower the number of cops and get rid of other specific departments? Would you have fewer cops so we can pay them more? How would you get out of this dilemma?
So I remember 10 years ago when the murder rate was much higher, and there was a huge push for more cops on the streets. And so I'm reluctant to commit to lowering cops, because I think that, you know, nationally the crime rate is down. Bridgeport, the crime rate is down even more than New Haven. Connecticut, the crime rate is down, and a lot of these things are much more dependent on economic trends. And I worry about committing to lowering the number of officers in New Haven.
So then, how are you going to? This is one of those tough questions that when you're running for office, it's too easy because you're not the incumbent to avoid making a stand that makes someone angry. But there's no other way to solve the problem.
Right. And I think that the pay is a challenge, but as with many things in our government, we need to prioritize. our funding. And there are places where we need to put more money and places that we need to take less. So,
But can you be specific here?
But I agree that the issues around the staffing of the police department, ultimately, I think it's more important to have quality than quantity. But give me more time, Paul.
Okay,
give me more time
that's
to answer
fair.
that question.
And let's also remind people that they're listening to Dateline New Haven at 103.5 FM live, stevenewhaven.org. We're talking with Justin Elicker, who's running for mayor against incumbent Tony Harp. And also Wendy Hamilton is trying to get on the ballot. She might run. Justin, I think, is it fair to say that at this point in the campaign, you're addressing a lot of specifics like lead paint, drug policy. You're looking at big themes, but that you're asking that not every specific tough choice that you'll be able to give an answer today, this early in the campaign, and that would be one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair?
That we're not going into a lot of detail.
That you're not be able to give a detailed answer to every tough choice that the mayor faces.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Because that's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm never running for office, so let me give you my answer.
Okay.
I don't mean to act like a smarty pants because I know less than the people who make these decisions every day. So I'm just a reporter who sounds like he knows something. But from talking to everyone, I believe there's no community policing, and that community policing evolves over time. So the things that made it work, like we need to continually strengthen our relationship with the Yale Child Study. And it was great a few years ago to start things like a cold case murder unit. It was great not great. We had a PERF, police executive reverse firm, come in with a whole plan after we had a corruption scandal in 2009, where we then added 4 assistant chiefs at the time to have more structure. I think we're at a phase now where we can go to 1 assistant chief. I think we're at a phase now where we can cut out units like the cold case unit. I think we're at a phase now with technology that Elicker has a point, that we do want cops walking out of cars, but how you manage them and how they define does not need to be strictly delineated between walking cops and driving cops.
Mm-hmm.
We do want them out of their cars. But I believe you could have fewer special units. You could have you never go shorter on patrol cops. Fewer people upstairs. And even though it's not a magic bullet, I think we can pay our cops more. Maybe not beat the suburbs, like you say, stress the ways that we are able to give kind of exciting work that matters,
mm-hmm.
but that we can have fewer cops paying more. And I also think that I'm not so sure we can limit what Yale can pay them to come. Instead, I would ask Yale to extend its home buyer program to cops and teachers so that they can buy homes in the city, be part of their community. It's a big ask for Yale, but not an unreasonable ask.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's your armchair journalist who never has to make tough decisions or really know what he's talking about, giving simple answers to these tough questions.
I think a lot of community policing is more about the relationship, right?
And the attitude. I think the police department has to start being able to police itself. Like, I think
right,
they don't admit mistakes when they abuse our rights, and you got to start doing that.
The Civilian Review Board, I think, is an indication of the frustration that community members felt about the police department not following through in certain areas. And I think that, the overwhelming majority of officers are doing good work, but that relationship in the police department's commitment to dealing in particular with issues around race and violence in our communities is something that it shouldn't have taken, 20 years for Miss Emma Jones to honor her son's legacy by getting a Civilian Review Board passed with teeth.
Mm-hmm.
We should be embracing those kind of changes if they're done in a smart way to bring more accountability to certain parts of the police department as well.
Let's just go one more point in the state of the city. So most of the people comment in the independent usually are upset with incumbents. So there were a lot of criticism.
I think many of them are upset with everyone.
Even a handful, though most are a little upset with you now because you're very popular in independent comment threads. But this one was interesting. This was a Harp supporter, Atticus Shrugged, one of my favorite names for a commenter in the Independent.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing it's an Atlas Shrugged reference. I don't know if it means Atticus Fitch or Atticus Bookstore Cafe, or maybe I'm missing something. And Atticus writes, I'd like to throw this out there. Crime is at a near record low. Unemployment is at a near record low. Wages are up. Graduation rate is up. College acceptance rates are up. City services are up. The city's ability to work with Yale's on solid footing. Even life in the downtown communities is better. Development is up. Though people may not want to believe these things, these measures, may not want to believe those things, the tools we use to measure them have not changed. New Haven is better today than Mayor Harp has taken office. Is Atticus Shrugged right?
I think it's an oversimplification of what's going on. If you look at what's going on in our Board of Education, for example, and the hemorrhaging of many high-quality employees, the disputes that are going on internally at the Board of Education, if you look at the fiscal crisis that the city is is in and not recognizing just how challenging the fiscal crisis is. If you ask residents in New Hallville if they're experiencing the benefits of the national decline in unemployment rate, you will get a very different answer than what Atticus Shrugged is describing.
And let me follow up one point there. You were asking about the structural deficit. So we have an estimated $30 million structural deficit, which means that every year we got to start off finding out $30 million to cut or raise taxes. Would you have issued a $160 million restructuring of debt, which gets you, and will help you, by the way, if you're mayor? For 5 years, you get $30 million a year that you didn't have. But over time, you spend a lot more money, and this debt is not being used for capital projects the way that borrowing is usually done in government. This is for general operating expenses, a practice known as scoop and toss, coined after cities like Hartford did it and went near bankruptcy. Would you have done that? If not, what you would have cut?
No, and I think we need to stop playing politics with our kids' future. You know, this is a typical thing that I've seen in New Haven over and over and over again, where we have 2-year elections, and it's easy for us to borrow money to get reelected and not make the difficult decisions, and pass on to our future generation and future politicians and future mayors, because the people that are in office at the time are not going to have to deal with the problem. Pass those problems on to the future. And parking meter monetization.
And just to be fair, you were one of the alders who successfully stopped that from happening, which was another version of scoop and toss. It was
right.
A way to, this was in the late aughts when the Stefan administration wanted
to sell. Feels like an eternity ago, doesn't it?
Yeah, they wanted to sell. I was back and reading the stories. It was you and Darnell Goldson actually led the cause on that as alders.
Well, I spearheaded it. Darnell might have signed on, but
anyway, the idea was that we sold all our future parking revenues to a private company, which lent us money up front.
Right. And there was this framing from the mayor at the time that this was absolutely necessary to.
So
make
the question
math
is,
work.
so
the budget problem. You're getting to what's the resolution of this problem, because similar to the police department, it is a very complicated and difficult problem to deal with. In the short term, we've only asked the taxpayers to sacrifice here, and we need to ask more entities to play a part in the solution. In the short term, we need to make more cuts to the budget, and we can't just make an 11% tax increase with no sacrifices on the other side. In the long term, we need to get more parties at the table to make this decision.
Which everyone has always agreed who has ever been mayor in New Haven, including Mayor Tony.
Yeah,
Barber.
but who are we actively doing that and looking at the options on the table? You know, so the entities that have a real commitment to solving this, should have a real commitment to solving this problem, are obviously the taxpayers, municipal employees, the state of Connecticut, Yale University. And are we really looking at all of the options that exist on the table? And I'm not saying that any of these options are what we should do, but like let's look at the long-term options, right? Because the direction we're going in now is bankruptcy. And down the road, that may be something on the table. There's other cities that have done that. It's not an ideal option for our city by any means. But there's other options. There's many other municipalities that are in similar situations to us, and we could be working with those municipalities to push the federal government for a bailout in exchange for us never doing this again. And I'm happy to talk about ideas and how we can make sure that we never do this again. And given the federal climate right now, I think it's unlikely to happen. But in the future, if there's a will, and there's cities in Republican and Democrat states that are dealing with this, we may have an option out down that avenue. Yale University, they could manage our pension funds. They're getting higher returns than we are on our pension funds. They could give us a no-interest loan. And the state of Connecticut,
but that's borrowing again.
No, so they could give us a no-interest loan, which is way better than what we just did, was refinancing our pensions.
Agreed, but that's not the same as making.
Give me a moment, Paul. Give me a moment. They could increase their voluntary payments for a period of time as well. Yale obviously has a stake in the future of the city as well, and that should be an option on the table as well. The state of Connecticut has a lot of financial problems. there was a Hartford-style bailout, and my sense is that there's not as much of a likelihood that there will be the ability in the future for New Haven to benefit from that. But the point is that we are not thinking strategically in the long term and being honest about our budget problems, and we need to look at and have a task force that's working through all of these different avenues. And I'm sure there are other avenues that I have not explored to resolve
Kate
the
Rosen,
problem.
we will get to your question in a moment. So
And just real quick, on the State of the City presentation last night by Mayor Harp, there was just no mention at all of what is internally the largest crisis our city is facing.
Mhm.
And what is the path forward? If we're talking about the state of our city, we need to acknowledge and take ownership over the severe financial crisis that we're in, and the fact that that will impact all of the services that she was championing.
So the trick for you is going to be, it's not necessarily going to happen in a year or two because
It's
we
many
got a
years.
4-year
How do I get
reprieve.
reelected?
But just to be
Right.
fair here, okay, so without disagreeing with any of your points,
Mhm.
that everybody wants Yale to pay more, they want the state to pay more, they want short-term there to be cuts. Tony Harp has said every one of those things. She has met with Yale. She's gotten increased contributions over the last year from Yale New Haven. She has asked the state for more money and really fought on that. And again, it's not fair, as you point out, to expect you to have every answer to every tough question. But the role of the press when you're running is try to push you to have to make a choice the way an incumbent makes that's going to get someone mad. And that's okay.
Right.
And I respect that you're not expected to have every answer, and the first job is the vision. But that's the easier part.
Mhm.
What would you do? What cut specifically would you make now that hasn't been made for the short term? And what would you do differently in trying to get Yale to pay more or the state to pay more?
So my wife and I look at our revenues and we look at our expenses. And if we have a tough year, we turn down
I got
the thermostat.
that. So make cuts. So what cuts would you make?
So we can do 10% across the board.
So just say
We can do
10%.
5% across the board. And in this past budget season, there was a push by the Board of Alders to look at what the different scenarios were like. Where are we actually sacrificing? And I run.
So you just say make across the board cuts and tell every department head. You just have to come back to
I
me.
I want to see what the options are on the table for different
So,
departments.
for instance, economic development might come back and say we don't need a director of both economic development and city plan.
Yeah.
Other people say we do because they have different jobs.
Or, for example, we borrowed $58 million for capital improvements. If we cap that at $20 million, what does that look like for the city?
Or, for instance, we say
every department head wants a new vehicle and wants XYZ. But in reality, we need to cap our spending.
Or if they say economic development, maybe we won't. Maybe the tough decision is we won't have small business development. We might put that at the Economic Development Corporation. Maybe it's that LCI Livable City gets broken up into building department functions and development functions for neighborhoods. You're still not at a point where you have a plan that says, here's the person who's going to be mad at me because we're going to say no to the service. But you're saying, and this is done sometimes, that you could tell every department head, tomorrow or next week, give me a plan for what 5 to 10% cuts would look like.
Mm-hmm.
And
we have not had a long-term plan for many years.
And what now that
let me
they are working, by the way, on a
the
long-term plan.
I'll
They're
talk
working on
about
a
the
5-year plan in the response to that borrowing and the criticism that happened.
Well, they're required to do that, right? There's been so much public pressure to do it now that they're doing that. How do I manage the land trust, right? Every one of our staff members will tell you that I am all over costs, that if there's a spike in costs, I immediately ask them what's going on. There's a high water bill, there's a high utility bill. And so every staff member everyone is looking for ways to save money. And we think of creative strategies for identifying problems and reducing the costs. And there's just not a one size fits all. It's not like, oh, we should cut the police. We need to have every team member identifying ways that we can reduce costs, and instead of just asking the taxpayers to pay more and more.
All right, and we're asking you to remember that you're listening to Dateline New Haven. Justin Elicker, he's running in a Democratic primary for mayor, leaving open the option of running as an unaffiliated candidate in November if he does not win the nomination, but he says he tends to win not just the primary but the party nomination. Kate Rosen writes in, hi, Paul. Hi, Kate. If you are taking questions, we're taking questions. Does Mr. Elicker plan to use the New Haven Democracy? Okay, this is a softball. Does he plan to use the New Haven Democracy Fund? And how does he feel about competing against a candidate who has already said that she will not. Ready? Line up. Damn.
Softball question. Yeah, of course, I plan on using the Democracy Fund. I care
That's
about
public financing. You
Right.
limit how much you raise to $307 a year rather than 1,000 of individuals. You swear off public interest money. In return, you get some matching dollars.
Yeah, interestingly, I think that around the nation, people are getting more and more frustrated about big money influencing politics, whether it's the Koch brothers or major corporations that are electing our leadership instead of the people. I think New Haven is no different in many ways, where there's people that, and you saw this in the campaign in 2013, there were people that had an interest in a financial interest in getting contracts with the city that were donating a lot to Mayor Harp's campaign. Different from last time, the Democracy Fund helped me raise money, right? Because I was kind of a grassroots newer candidate. This time, the Democracy Fund is more of an impediment for me because I am much more able to raise higher dollar contributions.
You actually said that last time. Last time you said, Justin Elicker, that you could raise more money if you didn't use the election fund, but you felt there were more benefits. It was important to win a way that's cleaner.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I covered that campaign. You did
perhaps
say that.
you covered.
You're changing history here, Justin.
I don't want to do that.
Okay.
But the fact of the matter is that it's important to not have people influencing what politicians do in the future. And our city spent a lot of time creating this ordinance to prevent money from influencing politics, and I believe in it, and I'm going to do it.
All right, Kate Rosen, thank you for your comment, and thank you. So, Justin, let's talk about 2013. You ran for mayor in 2013. Everybody was running for mayor because John DeStefano was retiring after 20 years in office, so that was one of those change elections. And you were in a pack of 7 Democrats at first, and looking at it from a distance, the way we conventionally look at campaigns, you were in the running to be 6th out of that 7, and you emerged 2nd in the primary and almost became mayor. I think people really respected the campaign you ran, whether or not they agreed that you were the best candidate. They think you ran the best campaign. What is different now? Now you're older. What are you, a whole big 45 now?
Older, you said. I thought you said older.
Older.
43.
43.
43.
Okay.
Yeah.
But now you're not the new kid on the block saying, hey, you know, I'm part of the new, maybe you are still saying this, the new generation that's running on clean money, that's looking at a city run in ways different from what it is, person you haven't seen in the mix. You've been in the mix. What's different now when you're running?
A number of things are different. I have a family, and I think that personally for me, the biggest difference. I have a 4-year-old and a 7-month-old, and you know, before when I heard parents talking about the public education system, it meant a lot to me, but it sure means way more when we're about to start shopping around for what school my daughter Molly is going to go to. We're going to Wilbur Cross this weekend to look at, there's a kindergarten kind of orientation session where they talk about the different schools. It means way more when your children are experiencing things and in the school system, and I think that's a major difference in my own life. New Haven's a different place.
Yeah, how is it different from 2013?
I think that it's funny because I've gone to so many management team meetings and different public meetings, and the same things keep coming up. You know, people want to know what number they are on the list for their street to be paved or their sidewalks to be fixed. People are concerned that the city's not responding to their issues, and
that's different from 2013.
I'm saying these are the same things.
Yeah.
I'm getting to the different part.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I think the difference is that there's a real interest in, and I think you've seen this nationally too, in a government that's more responsive to people and champions more of the civil rights issues of our time.
So civil rights
Black
is more
Lives
on the agenda
Matter
than last time. Yeah.
movement really came to significantly influence the thinking around issues around race nationally, and our city's no different than that.
So then how do you run as the white guy when the issue that's more at the forefront is civil rights? Not that black people and white people
I mean,
can't
I think,
work together in civil rights.
So I'm white, and the reality is that I can never understand what it's like to be black or brown. But I don't think that detracts from my ability to champion issues that everyone in the city cares about.
Mm-hmm. And I don't want to. I don't want to.
And I think that I imagine that some people would be pushing a narrative like that, but to discredit my ability to champion these issues because I'm white, and I'm not saying that you're doing this, but is unfortunate because I recognize that I come from a privileged background, but I think that doesn't mean that I will not be capable of prioritizing issues around racial and social and economic justice. And in some ways, looking at what's going on currently, I think that I will be much more effective at doing this. And I will surround myself with people that are from the community and look like the community to help move that vision forward.
Okay, and I was about to read you a question from Pat Kane. Okay, it popped up on my screen again. Should we tax wealthy nonprofits, and what can a mayor do to increase the tax base? And that leads
This is a Yale question, right?
I guess, but and also increase the tax base. And that was interesting. I think one of the biggest differences from when you ran last time is that those 2013 campaign was the last 5 minutes in our city's modern history when we had to bribe developers to build market rate housing. Now people want to build luxury stuff and market rate stuff in our house, and we have expanded our tax base.
Right.
And that's changed the whole way we interact with people who want to do work here.
Yeah,
but anyway,
I would say that trend in 2013 was already happening, right? New Haven is hot. It was hot then, and
it's a lot hotter now.
I think too often we give too much and don't believe in ourselves with these developers that come into town. And I appreciate the work of, in particular, some alders that are really pushing back on this concept that we have to beg people to come to town and give them tax abatements.
We don't have to beg anymore.
So I agree, but we're still doing it in many ways, right?
We use it for affordable housing. There's a whole debate nationally about whether you need tax breaks for that or whether you require developers in return for any public approvals to add what they charge the market rate renters in order to subsidize affordable housing. There's a third school that says just build up the supply. At first, it'll be market rate, but as happened with
right, I think you can do both, right?
In the 90s, that all becomes affordable housing. So Pat Kane's question, should we tax wealthy nonprofits?
Just to point on the economic development policy is not just building a bunch of buildings. Paul, my economic development vision is simply that people, everyone has the opportunity for a good job. And I think we need to be much more thoughtful about creating a pipeline for New Haven residents to capture these jobs, because people see these buildings going up and see a lot of wealth and investment in downtown, but not everyone is experiencing their own boats rising when they see other people's boats rising, and have other ideas on how to do that. But to Patricia's question, and I'm happy she said wealthy nonprofits, because I run a small nonprofit, New Haven Land Trust, and we are not wealthy. Even though we're doing a lot of good. So the short answer is Yale has to do more. And I gave this example of there being gourmet buffet for some of us in the city, not us. I don't eat the gourmet buffet, but some people in the city.
I was there a couple of years ago. They have amazing stuff.
It's incredible. Yeah. Someone invited me to lunch there the other day. It was ridiculous.
They got vegan food.
They have people in chef's hats that are preparing to order. And another comparison, if I may, is so I went to the School of Management, and I get their annual report. And similar to the New Haven Land Trust annual report, in the back they have donor levels and who donated. And ours has, $1 to $25, 25 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to whatever. And we go up to 10,000. And if I get a 10,000 donation for the Land Trust, people celebrate in the office, right? School of Management doesn't stop at 10,000. And I don't even know if they acknowledge the 1 to 25 people, by the way. I was reading it the other day. It's 10,000 to 100,000, 100,000 to 500,000, 5 to a million, above a million. And I'm thinking to myself, just how we look at the inequities that exist in our city. And, I think that Yale does a lot for New Haven. Yeah, and we need to acknowledge that. But my God, that amount of money going into the School of Management.
So can we realistically pursue taxation? That's the question devised. That's the tough question. How would you do it?
So I think there's all different ways that we can, both through carrots and sticks, influence Yale. And I think we can do both. And you see what the Unite Here has done with primarily a stick, which is bad PR for Yale University, to get Yale to commit to giving 500 good jobs to New Haven residents, and Yale promised to do that, and I think they need to follow through on that promise. And there's going to be a reckoning over the next month or two about that question. But Yale simply needs to do a lot more, and there's a lot of ways that I think that the city has tools to encourage Yale to do that.
Justin Elicker, did you say, what about taxation? Do you want to get the state law changed so they can be taxed?
I think that's on the table as an option, right? And you know, my philosophy has I think matured over the years about Yale University, and Yale's a nonprofit, and so if you'd asked me in 2013, should we tax Yale? I would say you shouldn't tax nonprofits, right? They're providing a public good. But you know, the difference between a Yale University and New Haven Land Trust. New Haven Land Trust is a nonprofit in New Haven that benefits New Haven residents. Yale University is a nonprofit that benefits the world through innovation, through creating future leaders, et cetera, et cetera. And New Haven should not be fully subsidizing that.
Now you're retiring the land trust. You sent out a note the other day in March. Right. Anthony Campbell stepping down as police chief in March. When in March are you stepping down as land trust director?
We don't have a final date. The board is hiring an interim executive director, and we want some overlap to ensure that there's a smooth transition.
Who's the interim?
We're working with Third Sector New England, which is a nonprofit that specializes in organizational transition.
Aaron Good, he always writes some of the best. No, tough.
Yeah.
Like on Mayor Monday, he said, "Okay, here's an Aaron Good question. Get ready." Okay, he does.
Saw him last night.
He asks great questions.
He likes going to a lot of meetings too.
Yeah, he really follows the fine print.
Yeah.
Dear Aaron Good, if you win, he'll make you a better mayor. Does Mr. Elicker, that's you, think the current registrar of voters are competent and capable of fixing the voting experience for New Haven residents, or would he like to see different?
Is Aaron running?
Elections
is
officials.
Is the question, is Aaron running?
What do you think about that?
I think this is what's gone on with voting in New Haven is a disaster, and it's so unfortunate for two reasons. Number one, because the right to vote and facilitating people's ability to vote is one of the most important things for a vibrant, accountable government. And we have just missed the mark over and over and over again. I've stood outside the polls every election for, 10 years now. And every year there's the same issues that come up, and more recently there's more. And some of them are challenging because of the day of voting and things like that. But we can anticipate these things.
Sometimes 3 teams of people or 2 working at the same polling place where nobody votes for 2 hours.
Right, and then, people are confused about where to vote. Et
what
cetera,
about Aaron's
et cetera,
question?
et cetera,
Do we have the right people in, or you want to change?
So I'm not going to throw people under the bus, but I think that something needs to change. The second reason that I think it's important for us to facilitate every person voting is because New Haven is powerful because we get so many people to the polls. And if we're impeding our residents, particularly, typically residents that are oftentimes more vulnerable or less likely to vote, and there's a lot of reasons for that. There's some structural impediments, people coming out of prison, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also an attitude, I think, among a lot of people of like, I'm tired of politics. It's never done anything good for me. And we need to take away every barrier possible to allow people to vote.
So any specifics of something you would do different?
Remember,
the register voter doesn't work for the mayor.
There's many things that I would do differently. One that I'll give you right now is, why do we not send out a sample ballot of what people are going to vote for before they go into the polls?
And would you send them to the right places?
I will give you a list of many. Yeah, of course. And the
you wouldn't tell
registrar
them to vote the wrong place.
No, I wouldn't. Okay. Registrar of voters generally gets that right, but they do get that wrong. But it's ridiculous that it's hard to find out what you're going to vote on. And people show up at the polls and say, "Oh, there's a referendum? I didn't know that. How am I going to vote on that?"
Yeah.
And that's a real disservice to the residents of the
Justin,
city.
we only have a few minutes here. One thing I try to do as journalists is figure out how elections work, and they've changed. And that's one reason I can't predict. I have no idea how this election is going to work out. But one thing is, in the old days, like a lot more of it's online. You were an early adopter of using web to communicate with people. You're doing a lot to your mailing list, a lot of videos about raising money. And how's that going, by the way? How's your fundraising going? How much have you raised so far?
We're getting there. Paul.
What you got?
We're getting there.
You're not going to answer?
No comment.
Okay. I thought you could be transparent.
Yeah, I will.
How much money you raised?
March 31st.
Ah!
Stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Okay. But how come, like, when you announced, and you're not the only one here, like Elizabeth Warren announced she's running for president in her driveway.
Mhm.
In the old days, meaning 2 years ago, 4 years ago, people announced they're running for office at, maybe 4 years, any office with a group of supporters in a big public event where they really sweated to make it look like there's a whole group happening
Mhm.
and it's the right racial breakdown, everything. Why is it now that this has changed?
Well, I don't know if it's changed.
Like, why
right?
didn't you
I mean,
have a big event to say I'm running?
You're using a couple of examples. There's a question about me and my choice about announcing, but there's another question of is politics
But you're not
changed
the
because
only one.
people are announcing personally. I don't know. I think there's an element of there's a lot of people there already because of social media, because of Facebook Live, things like that, and so there's maybe not as much of a need for that. For me, it was a very personal decision. As I mentioned, it's a conversation that I've had with my wife and my family, and there's a lot of sacrifice. I think that the time I spent away from my family, and I wanted to be there with my family.
All right, and we're running out of time. Jonathan Hopkins, long question. As important as the affordable housing conversation is, I'm worried it's distracted from the larger issue of property dispossession. Increasingly, the ownership of residential property in New Haven, this is big, is being transferred from individual owner occupancy to absentee ownership. Churchy South was originally planned as a resident-owned cooperative in '83, converted to a landlord-owned Section 8. This was the crucial moment. I don't want what happened to Churchy South on a small scale to happen to New Haven on a large scale. I hope the issue of property dispossession will become a focus of this campaign. Is this an important issue to Justin as he formulated any ideas about how to resist property dispossession in New Haven? Thank you, John.
I think this is a great question. The Mandy Managements, the Pikes. There's a lot of angles to this question, but specifically to what he is bringing up, I think one of the things that we can do, and it was raised with the Affordable Housing Task Force recommendations, is to allow more flexibility for property owners to do accessory dwelling units and things that allow people to own their home but have an additional source of revenue by renting out part
how we
of their
define
home.
family members and limits, what small square footage,
exactly,
zoning changes.
So there's a lot of opportunity to facilitate more people owning homes and keeping their homes.
Well, there are a couple hours more questions I'd love to ask you. I'm sorry I ran out of time. Maybe you'll come back.
Sure.
All right. So next year, if you give the State of the Union, if you become the mayor, State of the City, what will you be saying?
In 1 minute, we've got a lot of potential in this city.
You got to be able to say it in a minute.
You're right. You're right. We've got a lot of potential in this city, and we have a lot of work to do. And I'm looking forward to collaborating and being open about our challenges, because New Haven is one of the best cities out there.
It is.
And we have an incredible potential. It's hot. So let's work together to bring it forward.
Did that in under a minute.
You think so?
You remember George Bush the First? He once did his whole message in 3 words. Message, I care. Somehow that became a joke.
Not as inspiring.
It became a joke, yes, because he was reading it from a card, and everyone felt he didn't care. Anyway, good job.
Thanks
Justin
for having me
Elicker,
on.
thanks so much for coming on.
We'll do this again
We look
sometime.
forward to having a lot of continued conversation on the campaign trail. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Thanks for the questions on Facebook Live. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. Now, we know what it's like to be free, and that's Stacey Phillips in the background. We just got to remember to book our flight. Fly free with us all day and all night long here at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.